Welcome to the Black Sparrow Media Internet Broadcast Network.
You are listening to Linux in the Ham Shack. LHS is a podcast about Linux, open source, and amateur radio, for everyone. Now here are your hosts, Cheryl, W5MOO, Russ, K5TUX, and Bill, NE4RD.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome. You have tuned into episode number 552 of Linux in the Ham Shack, the most terrific amateur radio podcast on the internet. Tonight we're doing a deep dive episode, and I think due to illness and some lack of preparation, this might be a little bit closer to the shallow end of the pool, but it's an interesting topic and one that's being kicked around a lot lately, so we will talk about it. But before we talk about it, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. Cheryl, W5MOO, is on assignment this week, but I am Russ, K5TUX.
And I'm Bill, NE4RD.
All right, so here we are, and what we're going to talk about tonight, and it may deserve a second go-round after this one, once we both know a little bit more about it. But we're going to talk about Proxmox VE, specifically the virtualization environment, because Proxmox actually has three different products. They have a backup solution, an email security gateway, and a VE solution. But the one that I've been interested in, and lots of people that I know are interested in, is the virtualization environment. And the biggest reason for that seems to be the whole fiasco with VMware being purchased by Broadcom, which has created all sorts of confusion and consternation. When they took over, we actually had to sit back for, I think it was almost 3 months before my company was allowed to get a quote for an ESXi renewal from Broadcom. They weren't even allowing their techs to generate quotes. So if you didn't have ESXi, you were just kind of playing out of luck. Or if your license had expired, your licenses continued to work, but of course you couldn't get support. So big problem there. And then when we finally were able to get a quote, they changed the licensing model to a purely node-based. And they require a minimum 32, not node-based, core-based, and they require a minimum 32 core per CPU, and they charge based on that. And so the upshot is that our cost for vSphere and VMware jumped by about 300%.
Wow.
So, yeah. Here we go. So, yeah, and I've heard this from many people. I've heard this coming straight from the people who work now for Broadcom, who used to work for VMware. And they've changed everything. Their support portal has been moved to Broadcom, blah, 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 blah. So it is, for many reasons, pushing a lot of people to explore other virtualization stacks. And it just so happens that Proxmox has been around for a while. And I think they are strategically placed right now to gather a lot of customers from Broadcom, because they seem to be doing everything they can to push people away from the VMware platform by overcharging for it, by making support harder to get. And it just seems like it's one of those things where they bought it to kill it, which is... The big problem with that is VMware has integrations all over the place, third-party integrations with other vendors and apps and agents and everything else. And a lot of people are deeply invested in the VMware paradigm. And this is really causing a huge problem. But I started using Proxmox so I could evaluate it, both for myself and for my company. And one thing to note is that it used to be that the VMware ESXi hypervisor, just the hypervisor itself, was free, so anybody could use it on any hardware. It was only when you wanted the management platform where you had to start throwing money at it, for support and stuff like that. But Broadcom, in their infinite wisdom, has removed that as well. So there is no way even just a lay user can get ESXi anymore without paying for it. So if you're still using it, don't get rid of it because you cannot get it back. And if for some reason you have lost it, or you do want to do what I and a lot of other people are doing and explore a different virtualization environment, we can take a look at Proxmox, and that's what we're going to do tonight, at least insofar as I've explored it. One thing, so Proxmox is it's an Austrian company. So if you want to pay for their support, now technically, Proxmox isn't free either. However, there is a way to use it for free, which I'll go over here in a minute. And if you do want to pay for it, it is considerably cheaper than VMware. So let me see. The base one, 500 euros per year is the standard subscription. So, but that only allows you one CPU. Now, as I said, you don't have to pay them. They have free repos, and I'll explain how to set that up. But of course, if you do that, you don't get support, and the graphical user environment turns into nagware. It's just like a one-click pass through, to get past the nag and everything. But it is there, and they do say that if you're not using the enterprise repos, that the systems are not production ready. Updates roll out slower and things like that. So if you really want to use this for a business case, you're going to want to pay for it.
And that's a low barrier of entry, though. 500 euros. That's probably the cheapest subscription. Is that per socket or is that per core?
It says CPU, so I'm guessing socket.
Oh, so that's not too bad.
Now, 510 euros per year per socket. So compared to what VMware has become, it's it's a drop in the bucket. So, because I think our subscription for the number of cores we have went from, I think, 7K a year to 17.
Wow.
Now, one thing I did find out from VMware is that if you have the subscription model and you have the license for ESXi, whether it's the new paradigm or the old paradigm, when your subscription runs out, your ESXi license will still work. And to quote the VMware agent I was talking to, for now. So, there may come a time when your subscription expires, your VMware environment just stops working. So that might be something to stay aware of as well. So anyway, Proxmox. So if you're familiar with VMware and the way it works, walking around inside an ESXi hypervisor or using vSphere, Proxmox is pretty familiar. It looks a little different. One thing right off the bat I love about Proxmox is it has dark mode, which ESXi does not, at least not that I've seen. Somebody can correct me on that if I'm wrong. And you get the same sort of look and feel. You have your column on the left, which will show you your virtual hosts and so on and so forth. You get a middle column, which gives you the context-sensitive menu for whatever you have selected in the left-hand column. And then your right-hand column is the output from whatever it is you've selected in the other two columns. So when you install it, it's an ISO image, just like VMware. You install it on bare metal, creates a virtualization environment, gives you your GUI front end, and by default, the enterprise repos and the enterprise support packages are enabled. So if you're going to use this for personal use, you want to turn that off. And what you do is, in your data center on the left-hand side, you'll see your VM host. You click on that, and then under Updates, in the middle column, there's an option for repositories. And in the repositories, what you do is you disable the the two repositories that say enterprise, and you enable the no subscription sources, and then you can do an update and a reload, and you'll be using the community repos instead of the paid ones. Now, once you've done that, then you're going to get all of this is not ready for prime time. These are not production ready servers, blah, 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 and you'll get the nag every time you log in and so on and so forth. But once you get past all that, you're still able to use the system and it works just fine. So just like with your VMware, you manage things the same way. You have pools that you create from disk storage. It uses LVM, but it has an overlay on top of LVM for managing your physical volumes, your logical volumes, and so on and so forth. It does make it pretty straightforward. You do want to make sure you're paying attention to your physical volume environments, which are called BVEs, because the default one is the one that the Proxmox server itself is installed on. And if you start installing a bunch of logical volumes inside that physical volume, you're going to find that you're probably going to run out of space very quickly. So the first thing you really should do is create new physical volumes, presuming that you're doing this in a server, scenario. You're going to have a fair amount of storage, I would guess, and hope that you would have several terabytes, of course, whether you're spread out over a software RAID or a hardware RAID. And you're going to want to partition that into your PVEs. And then once you've done that, you can assign logical volumes to those. And that process is done when you do the create VM wizard. There's a button in the upper right. It's blue on my screen. So you click on the create VM button. And the first thing I do is click on the advanced. There's a checkbox at the bottom for advanced because you're going to want to see all your options. So what you do is you create a node name. It auto selects a VM ID for you. It starts at 100 and goes up from there, and that will be the ID of your virtual server. The other stuff you can set or not if you want to. Things like the name of the server, the resource pools, your startup and shutdown delays, whether you want to start the VMs at boot, that kind of thing. Then you can go to the next one, which is OS. This is where, like in VMware, you select what kind of VM you're going to be running, whether it's Windows, Linux, Mac OS, whatever. Although it says Linux, Microsoft, Windows, Solaris, and other. So I'm not sure entirely what kind of support we got here. Of course, you can select a physical DVD drive if you have one. You can select an ISO image, which is how I do everything. And there's an interface for like uploading ISOs and whatnot. So pretty straightforward there. This is going to make me select options that I can't really select. Okay. So then you choose your graphical card options, your BIOS options, SCSI controller. Then you move on to disks. This is where you make sure you have your PBEs created and make sure you put your storage into the PBEs that you want to use, not the local LVM. That's almost assuredly not the one you want. You set its size, and then there are a couple other options, whether you're going to replicate it, whether it's read-only, so on and so forth. One thing I did notice is that the default async IO setting is IO_ring or uring. And I had everything set up that way. And for some reason, if you want to migrate storage from one PBE to another, if your async IO is set to the default, it won't let you. I did switch it over to native, and that does allow you to migrate volumes. I have not done any research into the three different options, the IO, uring, the native, and the threads. So I don't know what's better, what's useful, or whatever. I did notice that if you use the default and you try and migrate a physical volume, or a logical volume rather, to a different volume environment, it says you cannot, which is kind of a pain in the ass. But so I have no idea why that's the default, but it is. Once you've selected your storage and created your drives, then you can tell it how many cores and sockets you want, how many virtual CPUs, and of course you can do your limits I think I just left everything more or less default. I just picked the number of cores that I wanted and just went on my merry way. Memory, of course, choose how much memory you need to allocate to your virtual machine. Network, of course, there's a separate area for creating networks. I have not explored whether they allow you to do distributed switching. That's one of the features that's an enterprise feature in VMware, and I'm hoping that it's available to just anyone using Proxmox, because it's a great feature, and I wish we didn't have to pay extra for it in VMware. And if anyone doesn't know what distributed switching is, it means that all of your virtual machine hosts in a stack share a switch. So that means that VMs on VM host 1 and hosts or virtual machines on VM host 3 that are both connected to VLAN 2 and the distributed switch can talk to each other. If you don't have that feature, then each VM host has an individual switch, and they do not talk to each other, which makes migrating from one VM host to another very difficult. And it also means that if you have machines that need to talk to each other, they have to be on the same VM host. Distributing switching gets rid of all of that. I'd love to be able to say that I love it, but I've never been able to use it. So. Then you get a confirmation page, and there's a button at the bottom that says Start After Creating, which you can check or uncheck as you wish, and then you click Finish, and you've created a virtual machine. In the left-hand side of the dialog, you'll see your VM ID and the VM name that you've given it, the host name. And then once you've done that, it'll either start up if you selected that option, or you can click on it and select Start, and then it will start up. And the whole process behind this is all done with QEMU. So that's the virtualization technology that's employed by Proxmox. So if you're at all familiar with QEMU, then you know what technology is being used here. I have 3 VMs defined on my host. I honestly cannot remember the specs of my host, so I'm going to go look at it now here. I have, how much CPU do I have? I have 12 CPUs. And I have, how much RAM here? 32 gigs of RAM. And yeah, it shows me I have 12 Intel Xeon CPU E5 2430s at 2.2 gigahertz. It's only one socket. It's a 12-core single socket CPU. And it's running Linux 688. So that's the current version of Proxmox, although this might be slightly out of date. It's version 8.2.4 right now that I'm running. But it gives you a nice summary screen. You can click on your VM host and click on summary, and it gives you all of your usage, network, CPU, all of that kind of stuff. Or you can click on a VM host, or a VM itself, and click on summary, and then you'll get all of the deets on your VMs. Show you how much CPU they're using, how much memory, how much space they're occupying on disk. There's nice real-time graphs. So, and the sort of task and log area that's at the bottom of a ESXi host screen is also in Proxmox. It looks very similar. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do with this. Like there are probably 1,000 buttons I haven't pushed yet. There are options for setting firewall controls, logging. Let's see. You can DNS, local DNS. A lot of these are just windows into the Linux subsystem that runs Proxmox. So you'll get things that just look like text representations of like host files and whatnot. But you can edit those directly in the UI, so that's nice. It allows you to manage your certificates, so you can make it so that you have CA signed certs if you don't want those ridiculous messages. It also can auto-manage Let's Encrypt, so that's nice as well. Other than that, moving around in it is pretty straightforward. All of the options are pretty well laid out. Your most important stuff is in the upper right, like for creating VMs and stuff like that, or rebooting, reloading, connecting to your virtual consoles. The virtual consoles are done right inside the UI, which is really nice. It leverages several different technologies, but the default is no VNC, and it works very well. You can also full screen it and stuff like that. So it looks like you're sitting on the system, not remotely, which is really nice. You can set users and groups, define permissions for access to various features, whether you want to allow people to manage things, create VMs, delete stuff, manage networks, whatnot, all kinds of authentication and access control. Hardware tab on your VMs will show you what you've defined for each VM, and on the summary on the host, it will give you all the information about the host itself. And then, of course, you can just drop, if you're on the host, you can just drop straight into a Proxmox shell. So you can destroy your system at your leisure. So let's see, NTP services, again, the repos, so you can manage whether you're using the enterprise stuff or the community edition stuff. Also allows you to set up replication and automatic backups inside Proxmox, so you can keep snapshots, auto snapshots, and local backups. And I believe you can also set up like NFS backups and things like that as well too, if you want to keep copies of your VMs. So yeah, it's pretty nice. I've been enjoying it. Other than the tiny little inconvenience of the NAGware, it's pretty easy to use. And like I said, I'm running 3 virtual machines on it right now. I have not done any performance benchmarking, but I haven't noticed any issues with those VMs running at all. So I definitely think it's a way to get away from ESXi if you need to or want to. The only thing that's going to lag behind is the third-party integrations, because a lot of those are still focused on VMware, but hopefully they'll start coding toward Proxmox and other solutions as well in the near future.
You're talking about like management plugins and stuff like that?
Well, like, for example, if you're using backup software like we do, we use Veeam, and Veeam has plugins where it can directly manage the hypervisor. So it can do auto snapshotting and stuff like that, straight out of the backup solution.
Right, but with Proxmox, they have their own backup solution that you can snapshot too, right?
Right, yeah. I'm just saying if it's something that's in your workflow, some of your third-party integrations, might not work. So,
and I see there is an ability to bring in your existing ESXi containers or servers or whatever, VMs.
Yeah, I have not explored that at all. So I just built this one from scratch and created VMs that I was from scratch. I didn't migrate anything. So I have not seen how that works, and I have no experience with it. I assume you haven't tried it either at this point.
Well, I don't have an ESXi to play with. I have spent part of the day watching videos, so I feel like I'm all buffed.
Okay, well, show off some of your pecs then.
Oh yeah, well, I just thought it was interesting as an aside that you can do that. So yeah, if you go up to your data center, which is your top level on your server view, and you go into storage, you can add a storage object of ESXi, which allows you to connect to your server and everything else, and then you can bring over your VMs and attach them to your host or node, right?
Does it create the space and then like move like the VMX and stuff, or does it? Okay,
everything. Yeah. There's some trickery too with because you mentioned something about like logical volumes and stuff like that, and there's some trickery to migrate those so it uses like virt.io and stuff like that properly, and so it'll use like the SCSI driver and stuff like that in Windows by installing the guest editions and stuff in the individual hosts. Yeah, it looks really cool. This is not something I normally play with. And it's not, they do mention containers, but it's not containers in the way you think of like a Docker container or Kate's solution, Kubernetes solution. Although you could obviously run Kubernetes inside of this as a virtual machine for your controller and then one for your node. But this is not like you're not going to just dump containers directly into it. They do have their own kind of container thing, and they call that the LXC containers, which is slightly different, although it looks very similar to how you would kind of build out like a Docker file. So if you want to do like an application specific build and create a minimal distribution. They have that sort of capability, but it's not a one-for-one bring your Docker file over and everything else. And if they suggest if you're going to do a Docker file, you would run it just directly with a QEMU VM anyway. So yeah, there's a lot of cool little things. You can you can do high availability stuff too. You can bring in multiple nodes to your data center, so you can actually fail over back and forth between the nodes. Much like bringing VMs over from ESXi, you can bring it over from your backup server if you have if you're already running Proxmox and you're bringing up a new node, you can just bring those containers over and bring them into your new node. So if you're creating like a failover node for everything, yeah, it's just, I don't know. I'm just like I say, I don't really mess around with this stuff because I'm not in a systems job where I'm constantly managing hardware. Although sometimes it feels like with the advent of DevOps that we do more and more stuff on the hardware side. Although we try to programmatically create those objects and containers and everything else, so we're not having to worry about the hardware, the true hardware side of things. It's we just say, hey, we need another container, ask for one, and it magically appears, or it says, no, you don't have enough resources or credits.
Yeah, but, the thing about high availability, that was one of the issues that comes up in VMware when you don't have distributed switching, because the high availability will allow the VM to be migrated from a flagging host to another host. But if it's dependent on another VM that's on the original host, then they won't communicate if you don't have distributed switching. So that's one of the things I really want to investigate in Proxmox. I'm looking at the network configuration right now in the host, and it is definitely different than VMware, so it's not intuitive to me whether any of these options allow for distributed switching, but I'm sure going to find out really soon.
Yeah, I think this is, like you said, a kind of early deep dive into it for us, and especially for you, since you're definitely considering it as an alternative to the commercial solution. And Alex just piped in the chat room and he says, for what it's worth, the LXD preceded Docker by a long while. 2008 versus 2013. So yeah. I mean, it looks just like Docker, sort of. The way they describe it in the configuration and how you actually spit it up. So, it is what it is, right?
And also, to be clear, Proxmox is not the only alternative to VMware out there. There are lots of other ones. Steve mentioned Harvester, which is based on OpenSUSE, I guess, and is a hyperconverged environment, or HCI. Hyperconverged infrastructure is the new hotness term. That does the same kind of thing. There's also what was the other one? There's Ranger. There was another one. Somebody mentioned another one earlier, either today or yesterday, which I've already forgotten. So,
XCPNG?
No, but that's another one. And then, of course, there's the real low-level stuff, too. Like we were talking about Docker and Vagrant and Zen and QEMU at the CLI level and stuff like that. So there's stuff that allows you to do all of this virtualization with all the fancy front-end stuff. There's a million ways to skin this cat. It's just which one do you want to use. But I like the Proxmox solution. And they do, give you the option of using it, trying it, although they say it's not production ready. And then, of course, give you a reasonable option if you do want to sort of buy into their paradigm. So am I pronouncing it wrong? Is it QMU?
I've heard it called everything, like KMU and QMU and Q. I always say out the words QEMU, but that's just me.
Yeah, I always say QEMU too, but I don't know.
It's kind of like when I say QT and everybody's like cute.
Yeah, I sort of ought to go to Qt because the developers of Qt call it cute. So if the people who write the software call it something, I'm going to call it that.
Yeah. I just always forget.
Yeah, that's fair. Everybody forgets.
Yeah, how do you pronounce QEMU?
I'm using QEMU on Linux. So,
Yeah, on Linux.
on Linux, yep.
Or FreeBSD. Yeah, so I actually installed Proxmox in a VM just to make it even more weird.
That's very meta.
Very meta. I put my Vert Manager in a Vert Manager and a Vert Manager.
How's the overhead on that?
It runs fine, actually. This box has a lot of oomph to it, so.
Yeah, I mean, 12 cores and 32 gigs of RAM was not too bad. I mean, I don't think I'd want to run more than 3 or 4 VMs on it, the one that I'm testing out, but it seems to handle the ones I've got rather nicely. I was even running a Nobara on it.
Nobara. Nice. Yeah, I think I threw 16 CPUs and 16 gig at this thing. So, I mean, I'm not running anything on it, but it's running.
That's good. I mean, and you definitely get a chance to play around with this, and it might be worth looking at some of their other things, like the email gateway and the backup solution at some point. But this is just kind of an overview of the virtualization infrastructure that they have. It seems to be pretty well fleshed out. From a UI perspective, it's clean and usable. You get really good access to your virtual machines and your infrastructure. Everything's HTML5 web-based, and it's pretty easy to sort of dive in and get up and running with it. So, I mean, if this is something you're looking at, whether just to play with or as an alternative to the nightmare that's going on over at Broadcom, I mean, I can certainly recommend giving it at least a kick in the tires on it for sure.
Yeah, I'm definitely considering, putting it down here in the garage where I have all my basically lab stuff, all the stuff I try to build and break and stuff like that. And I see it as a useful tool, especially when you're testing out stuff and, or, just want to have something running and have it run one thing or something stupid like that, here in the shack where I have full computers doing stuff that they're just sitting around waiting for input. It's like, I don't need them all. I can just probably throw most of the stuff onto a single, just bigger box and then just run the VMs for most of the services.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm still running ESXi for the ones that I have because the original model allows for a perpetual license. It's only when I'm forced to upgrade at some point that I'll lose access to that. But in the meantime, I still use that for hypervisor for most things, and I pretty much virtualize everything. I don't run anything bare metal server side anyway. So, but this is nice to have the Proxmox in the environment and kind of have a hand in both and see how they integrate and see what the migration path is going to be going forward. So, yeah, I like it so far.
Well, cool. I think it's about as deep as we can go at this point, and we'll probably keep talking about this topic as time progresses and we get more experience with it.
Yeah, absolutely, because I have a feeling this is going to be a topic that keeps recurring, given the current environment around VMware and where it's headed. So, all right, with that, let me get back over to the Etherpad because I've been bouncing around in Proxmox here while we've been talking. So. Well, that brings us down to our announcements and feedback, and I will let you read the feedback. I've already responded to the person once, but I think you might have a little bit more experience with boxes than me, so I might ask you a question about it once we get through the question itself.
Okay. And you want me to read it too, right?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I was actually just looking up exactly how I did it because I haven't done it in a while. But this question comes from Gestal2 on YouTube, and he says, or they say, any thoughts on how to get my TTY USB 0 to work with a COM port? I have it set up, but nothing. TTY USB 0 is created when I connect my Kenwood TS590. I have used regedit in the bottle to connect COM1 or 5 to dev TTY USB 0. My user is added to the dial-out group. And that's the extent of the...
Yeah, there was a follow-up where I asked him why he was doing it this way, because the applications he was connecting to are Linux native, but he wanted to run it inside a Windows bottle, and the answer he gave me basically said, I can do it Linux native if I have to, but I kind of want to do it this way just because. And I didn't know how to finish answering that because I didn't know if Bottles works in the same way that Wine does, where you have to use like DOS devices to link the COM ports, or can you speak to that?
Yeah, so you have to create a link to the DOS devices. I was just looking to see if there's newer documentation on that. But so essentially you create an LNTAC-S, a symbolic link to the device inside of your wine box configuration inside like the DOS devices directory. And you'll name it what it should be, like COM1, COM2, COM3, COM4, COM5, COM6, whatever. I would always suggest going a COM5 or something like that, just something higher, just because sometimes the lower COM ports have other crap that gets installed, like Intel stuff and everything else. And I can't remember specifically if that would be a problem. But I generally go to a higher number, and I would also probably not link it to the USB TTY0. I would link it to the serial by ID instead. So that way, in case you move it or change it and it gets re-enumerated somewhere else, you would still have it hard linked inside of your bottle. Some people there's been troubles with people having other issues with just permissions, not necessarily just like being in the dial out group where the port actually had a chip, chmod the port, but I wouldn't recommend that. I'm sure you're probably just linking it improperly or in the wrong space, because when you use bottles, it does create individual wine configurations for each of those bottles or containers or whatever you want to call them. Bottles, I guess, is what they're called. And they'll be unique to that. So ensure that you're actually doing it inside of the bottle configuration and not inside of just your, .config wine config or something like that, or .wine prefix config on your root or something, or in your home directory. Make sure it's in the bottles configuration storage area.
All right, that's kind of where I thought it was going, because I know bottles is kind of linked, or if not linked, actually. Like a superset of wine, so I knew that the conventions for linking things in and out of the bottle should be similar, but I wasn't 100% sure. So,
yeah, it's exactly the same. I mean, bottles are just running instances of wine.
Right. Okay. Fair enough.
And always make sure you're running the latest version of wine too. You can also even use Proton these days as a wine drop-in. So those are also alternatives should you have anything else that is slightly weird.
All right. Very good. Well, that brings us down to the end of our feedback for this time. But we do have some new subscribers, supporters, and live show participants. So we'll enumerate those. On Twitter, we had Robin Harley and Misha _LeBlanc. On YouTube, Petubastis73. On Discord, WInfo, Alex, N4VKF Kenneth. Null pointer exception. That didn't crash the server, sorry. Diddy, Dum Diddy. Soko Taco, and UG57. On Instagram, we have JO4MSW. On Mastodon, we had CX7ABR and GertVK. No merch sales on the mailing list. We have KG5PTE joined us over there. And in the live show tonight, we had Don, KB2YSI, Jill, K1TTZ, Tony, K4XSS, Alex, no call that we are aware of, and Steve, KJ5T. So thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. Sorry this one took so long to get out, but I got some kind of awful, horrible cough thing, and I'm only now recovering from it 10 days later. So, that is what it is. But anyway, really appreciate you guys.
And I did forget one piece of news.
Let's get that then before we run out of here then.
Because I totally forgot about it.
Well, what is it? What news?
Well, I was reminded by John, the nice guy, that OggCamp 2024 is coming up here quite rapidly over in Manchester, UK. They are having it there in October 12th and 13th. Its tickets are available now on their website, so try to participate in that if you can. So check out OggCamp.
All right, very good. One of these days, I would love to go to OggCamp. I would love to just go to Europe again. Anyway, very good. For those of you who can attend OggCamp, hope you have a great time, because I will not be there. But anyway, With that, let's go ahead and wrap up the show. Say thanks to everybody who supports the show financially and everybody who just listens, whether it's download or live. We really appreciate each and every one of you, especially those who help keep the lights on. Really appreciate that support. And in the meantime, we hope you have a great week. Hope you'll tune in to the Short Topics episode next time around. And with that, let's go ahead and get on out of here. This has been episode number 552 of Linux in the Ham Shack. And for the On Assignment Cheryl, W5MOO, I'm Russ, K5TUX.
And I'm Bill, NE4RD73.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Linux in the Ham Shack. LHS is a community-sponsored podcast. Live recordings are Sunday nights at 8 o'clock Central Time. Our homepage can be found at lhspodcast.info. You can support the podcast via Patreon at patreon.com/LHS podcast. We're also on Discord, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube and Mastodon. Contact us via email at info@lhspodcast.info or via voicemail at 190954777469. That's 1909 LHS show. We also have merch. So until next we meet, remember to always heed your hedonism.